Ngowi TV, informed economists and business perspective.
The G, that is government expenditure. So when the government reduces expenditure, really, the economy suffers, income suffers, multiplier effect gets reduced. So
wherever there is a budget, something which is certain that's going to happen is the tax measures. And tax measures basically is talking about how much the government is expected to collect and is going to collect. And
actually, rural poor will be much better off in this country if they can access health facility very easily and of quality.
You will see the private sector individuals will respond straight away. So when I was talking about Bagamoyo as a port, the Bagamoyo and Dar es Salaam becoming a mega two cities, like the way you have Pretoria and Joburg with Midrand.
The key issue now is we are not able to achieve the 29.5. Out of the 29.5, we managed to get only around 20. Now we are going to 31.7. That is 11.7 trillion, I call it new money. Where is it going to come from?
Per capita income, we have been told has increased, but the increase is minimal, because to be a low-level middle-income country, we need to have an increase of about 2,000 and higher figure. It goes up to 8,000.
Last year we had the budget speech, and then when the finance bill was released, to our surprise we get some other stuff which was actually not mentioned even in the main budget, and that was included a special tax regime in the oil and gas.
I think from an industrial point of view, there are challenges around the reliability of power and also the cost of power, which would really give us a competitive advantage as a country vis-a-vis our neighbors in the region, such as Kenya and Uganda, Rwanda, Burundi, Ethiopia, etc.
A reduced corporate income tax rate for certain assembly activities, simplification of the rules, all good things. Obviously, life will become more expensive, excise duties will go up, but considering all of this, I think, if I may summarize it, the feeling is that there is some room for moderate optimism. I haven't seen, though, enthusiastic clapping on the tables as we have witnessed yesterday. But I think overall the feeling is quite positive.
My name is Laurian, Justinian, as Tom said. I'm going to take you through the tax measures, which more or less has been covered by the previous presenter. So, in fact, maybe I'll look in terms of what are we going to expect in terms of administration, and from our experience, what might be the implication. I would say once again, welcome for joining us, EY, for this morning event. As he pointed out, actually, in whatever the case, and as always been in the history all around, wherever there is a budget, something which is certain that's going to happen is the tax measures. And tax measures basically is talking about how much the government is expected to collect and is going to collect. And actually, bottom line, in fact, it goes how then the relevant tax registration going to change in order to facilitate that tax collection. And at this particular moment, unfortunately, our discussion actually is based on the budget speech, not even on the finance bill. So we don't know in terms of registration what does actually the law says and what might be the implication. For example, I might say, last year we had the budget speech, and then when the finance bill was released, to our surprise, we get some other stuff which was actually not mentioned even in the main budget, and that was included a special tax regime in the oil and gas. So basically, I mean, we are still uncertain without the finance bill to know for sure that these are actually the tax measures that are going to be implemented. So maybe I wouldn't spend much time in terms of the policy because it was already covered by the previous presenter, but I would like maybe to just do some emphasis in terms of if the government says it's going to enforce the EFD, what do we expect as we taxpayers? And from my experience, what in fact do we expect? The feel that I get is that first, basically the TRA going to now start emphasizing much more audits based on the EFD machine. I think you'll agree with me that at the moment, TRA used in the previous years to do reconciliation of the financial statements, turnover vis-a-vis the VAT return, but now they have moved to reconciliation of EFD machines because they know for sure once you put in the information in the EFD machine, they have it in their system, so whenever they come in, then that's the target. So basically from the practical perspective, you need to get a feel that that's going to be the target when the TRA is carrying out the audit. So there was also an issue which I think maybe Professor didn't emphasize in it, is in terms of the escrow account for refund for the importer of industrial sugar. I think in the previous two discussions when we had this similar kind of gathering like this one, there was a concern from the manufacturer of the import of the industrial sugar that actually the government introduced that you have to pay more and above the normal rate, and that difference is going to be refunded. But the issue is the refund was not actually forthcoming, in the sense that the TRA was not actually refunding those excess money that was being paid. So we then discussed what mechanism should we put in place to make sure that now actually whatever you pay, more I would say maybe as advance tax, you get it back. Now the introduction of escrow account, I think maybe that's one of the right action that would now solve the refund problem. Also, Professor talked about this proposed measure on the export of minerals and the clearing house and the 1%. Basically, I mean, if you look at it, basically is more or less you increase some administrative cost. And the process in terms of, because the process is not yet clear, and I was wondering under what registration gonna this clearing house work. Maybe we would see if we have a bill in place, maybe we would have some feel of where this actually gonna be seated in terms of registration. But at the same time, I see some challenges when it comes to the mining company who does actually have the mining development agreement in place. Whether this might be treated as loyalty, then that's going to be an issue. If maybe treated different, that's maybe might be some challenge around that. Then, as I mentioned earlier, of course, the bottom line when you propose the tax measures, that means you say which tax registration is going to be affected by these tax measures. So basically, these are the tax registrations that are going to be affected by the proposed tax measures. We have the value-added tax, the income tax, excise duty, road traffic act, and local government, East African community, and others. When I touch with the VAT, which has already been covered, I say maybe the place where maybe some business going to be celebrating is zero rating of the auxiliary service, which has been a fight for the past 2 years. And at the same time, basically when you say this is zero rating, that means it's not exemption in terms of the technical perspective as far as VAT is concerned. Basically what you're saying, actually, the zero rating is as good as saying this is an export. So basically you have actually entitlement to claim even the input VAT, that the VAT you have to pay when you procure goods and services, which ideally is a good idea. That means apart of not charging the VAT as output, but also you recover your input VAT, which I think in my view is a good measure. But then on the other front is what basically have we missed on the VAT? The exemption maybe is fine, but what have we missed? Because there was a lot of issues that was, for example, introduced this last year, which we expect maybe this year going to be addressed. One of them is VAT on financial services, which is not much very clear, but we don't see that clarity at the moment. VAT on tourism, which I think even the Member of Parliament raised some concern. There was no mention about it. And then we expect maybe the government would think around and maybe reduce the VAT rate, but we wouldn't see that being as part of the proposal. I don't think maybe the reduction of the VAT rate from the 18% might happen, because that would have been a key message that the minister would have in fact mentioned. So those are some silent features we don't see happening on the, featuring in the VAT proposal. But in fact, the exemption on the capital goods, yes, because we had actually, we used to have the exempted on capital goods. The challenge is which particular item would in fact be classified as capital goods. The minister says it's going to be in terms of HS code. Maybe that would be fine and simplify the process in terms of negotiating with the tax authority to say this is capital good or this is not a capital good. But at the, at the same time, we had the deferment on the capital goods. That means then the deferment will not apply, or it might apply because this maybe is only focusing on a certain sector. So we don't have that clarity at the moment. Possibly we're going to get the clarity once we have the finance bill in place. Then on the income tax, we have, I think, maybe an interesting proposal in terms of reduction of corporate tax for a specific sector for the period of first 5 years from the date of commencement. I would say, I think it's a good move, but at the same time, if I do link the exemption of capital goods and the sector which under VAT, which have been targeted, and in this case, I see the sector actually different. But if there's, according to the minister's speech, that they want to stimulate employment and all this use of local raw material, in my view, the same sector which is actually sitting under exemption of capital good in the VAT should also fall under this category. Now the question is how they're going to actually administer this reduced corporate rate of 10%. Because if you say the reduced rate from the date of commencement, and we are talking in the sector which more or less is capital intensive, that means it is likely that maybe at the date of commencement, that taxpayer might be in the tax loss. If he's in the tax loss, that means there is no tax payable. And then if you say you're going to be in the loss for 5 years, that means you might not enjoy the reduction of capital of the reduced corporate tax. But nevertheless, we expect the bill going to, in fact, clarify that. Because at the same time, there is a catch when you talk about the alternative minimum tax, which is charged on the turnover. If you're in a loss position for 3 years, now this sector which now going to be enjoying the reduced corporate tax rate, what if they're in the loss position? Would the alternative minimum tax apply or doesn't apply? That's, maybe we can get that clarity when we have the bill. Then the other item is removing the inconsistent in terms of alternative minimum tax. There was inconsistent certain provision of the Income Tax Act talking about 5 years, the other one talking about 3 years. So more or less, even the tax authority in terms of administration, they are actually having a challenge because they don't know which one to apply. And from the taxpayer's perspective, it was maybe more or less like an opportunity for tax planning, if you wish. But now certainty has been cleared. Then the 5% final withholding tax for the small miners. I don't know how do you call the small miners. The 5% withholding tax as a final tax, I think in terms of administration efficiency, maybe it's fine, because I pay my 5%, then I need not to prepare the tax return and get them audited and all this kind of administrative procedure, which I think is fine. But the question is, the person who is actually supposed to withhold the tax is the person who is actually paying. So in actual fact, the person who is actually buying is supposed to be registered as a taxpayer. So there is actually then a process of registering those taxpayers, and how do you do it? Because I mean, the small miners, the way they work, and the circumstance in which they do their own business, hopefully maybe the government has some idea how they're going to do it. And then uplifting or qualifying capital expenditure for the purpose of the tax depreciation allowance for non-commercial vehicle. That, I think, is a good move in the sense that it was part actually of the proposal by the board auditors, and we have been fighting for this increase for the past, I think, 15 years, because once the Income Tax Act of 204 was introduced, and then they kept this kind of expenditure, but over time, for the past 15 years, the prices for the vehicles have been increasing, but the amount of the depreciation allowance that you get was, in fact, very minimum. So I think that's a good move. Then on the East African community, maybe I think Professor had covered quite a lot on this. Maybe I might not have to repeat. But there is one area of interest is maybe an increase in the penalty, but at the same time, then we see there is, in fact, on the last bullet, is in terms of the focus for the oil and gas that we see a lot of exemption being provided in that particular area. And this case, they are saying, in fact, they're going to now provide exemption for distribution of oil and gas. And if you remember of recent when in fact the government was signing a memorandum of the understanding between Uganda and Tanzania, then they promised that they have already cleared some issue with the investor, and one of the issues that they have actually agreed on the exemption issues. I think maybe that is one of them. But the question is, I don't see similar exemption applying for the oil and gas in the other tax registration. Maybe that's something that we might need to wait and see. The excise duty, maybe I may not have to repeat the same stuff that Professor has already covered. Probably on the minor changes, and actually maybe if I can take you back on the income tax, and maybe also there are some issues that we have not, in fact, seen, is because I remember at one time I was discussing with the tax authority, they were saying maybe there might be some tax amnesty, but I don't see featuring in here. And at the same time, they were actually talking about the review of the transfer pricing regulation to align with BEPS, but I haven't seen that mentioned in here. Possibly that's going to happen in the bill. Then on the minor amendments, as Professor said, maybe there isn't much to celebrate in here, in the sense that, in fact, you are actually maybe giving it on one hand and taking it on the other hand. But one thing maybe which is maybe might be of interest is that the tax amnesty, when you say now the previous penalties and outstanding bill that's going to be cleared, maybe that's going to be a good news, because now you're going to be less interaction with the trust police and possibly the Majembe and the like in the streets. So maybe that might be a good move. Then, as I said, in the absence of the finance bill, maybe we don't have much that we can discuss in detail. But nevertheless, as EY, we expect to have the finance bill in place, and finally the Finance Act. So once we have the Finance Act, we're going to arrange for the special training focusing on each particular section under the Finance Act. Thank you very much for listening.